Throughout history, the pen has been a tool for the artist, the politician, the author, and most importantly, the dreamer. The ink within is the lifeblood of illustrations, the written word, and mathematical equations, allowing those who would understand a glimpse into worlds other than their own. What worlds will you create while playing with ink? Hi, I'm Plutach.
And I'm Nayruan.
And this is...
Rygone.
And welcome to Playing with Ink.
Woo!
Ooh,
We're back.
smooth. That was really smooth. Okay, so, Rygone.
Yes.
Everyone knows, well, I'm assuming anyone who's listening knows what Playing with Ink is, but if you don't, we're a podcast who talks about world building. But Rygone, people don't know you. This is your chance to introduce yourself before we get started. Where can people find you, and what do you do, and all that stuff? Real quick before we dive into world building.
Oh goodness, that's quite the big question right there. So first off, my name is Rygone. To kind of give a little bit of background on myself, I'm a mental health counselor, and I've been world building for a little over a decade. I'm kind of just on and off here, there, and thither. And you can actually find me currently on World Anvil. That's where I'm kind of compiling all of my ideas, all of my notes, and all of my creations into one consolidated place for further refinement.
Cool. Now, if people don't know, Rygone is one of my favorite world builders in the space right now because of the world he's created. And if anyone who's had a conversation with me they probably know about Rygone in his world. Because I rave about this world. So let's just go ahead and get started because I am so excited. So I'm going to ask you a question that we ask all our guests. What do you think world building means, and how does it affect you while you're exploring, writing, or playing in a world?
That's actually a very good question, and that's actually something I will reflect back to you. What does world building mean to you? And I kind of bring about that in the manner of like, what do you feel when you look at a painting? What do you feel when you look at a television show? And oftentimes you garner, a set of emotions but most importantly, you garner investment. And I think that's particularly what world building is. It's an investment, not just from the creator trying to show what they have created, but also to allow people to invest themselves into what that creation is, to become emotionally invested, creatively invested, or just to have a fun time. World building is honestly something that allows people to interact and share in a way that I feel very few other things allow you to.
That is such a good answer.
That is a very in-depth answer.
That is such a good answer. Oh my goodness, I love it. And I love that you use the word invested. I haven't heard that word come up in the few months we've been doing this.
I haven't either.
Yeah, so that's such a cool way, or it's such a new way I've heard. It's probably not new, but it's such a new word to me when describing world building. So that's super cool. So let's talk about your world.
Okay.
So now that we know what world building means to you, what is your world? Just in very general terms, what is Refuge, which is your world?
That is also a bit of a complicated answer because realistically, probably the better question is what is it not? But to give a base answer, Refuge is essentially a culmination. It is a bits and pieces style world that allows people to kind of create their own stories within it. So to give a very, very basic kind of overlay of it, imagine the multiverse. Oh, yes, I know. We've all heard that over time and time again. We all know what the multiverse is at this point. What refuge is, though, is imagine if bits and pieces of all of those different layers of the multiverse kind of like broke off and fell for some reason or another. Well, there's a place where they all end up. That is the very bottom of reality, if you will, the very bottom of the infinite worlds. And that is refuge. Refuge is a patchwork quilt of all of these different lands, cultures, people, creations, monsters, whatever you call it, all kind of just consolidated into one infinite plane of existence. And that is refuge.
So cool.
Hmm.
Okay, so I know a little bit about Refuge, so I'm going into this with a little bit more knowledge. But Chandler, you don't know much about this project, do you?
I am going in this blind. Um, I normally do my research, but work has been just overwhelming. So I figured I'd go into this just naive as a child. So so tell me.
Well, what would you like to know? It's probably
So
the better question here.
so you said it's essentially like all worlds or multiverses just fall into this. Like the first thing that popped in my head when you were describing that is what's the place in Thor 3?
Sakar.
The car, that's it. So
Sakar.
Sakar, yeah. Uh, so that kind of popped into my mind. Is it sort of like that, or is not? Well, that's kind of like an insult, isn't it? Because that's where all the trash falls, isn't it? I realized that
Honestly,
was
I wouldn't even realize what you're talking about. I actually don't look too much at like modern media stuff like that. Not because it's not interesting or anything like that. I just never find the time.
gotcha. So let's take it in a different route. Let's go with the D&D version of like the astral plane in a sense,
Sure.
like where everything. So in a sense, it exists in the astral plane, and from
Mhm.
different material planes. Say one could be our world, it could be Earth, no magic whatsoever, or the other one could be Greyhawk, or the other one could be Exandria, or the other could be Allegasia, or something like that. So
Mhm.
from there, it just falls into the astral plane. So that's basically what we're looking at right now, right?
To more or less to an extent, although for my version, it's probably a lot more direct. If I recall what the astral plane is, it's kind of like an ocean with little bits and bobbles of these islands all over the place. For my world, lands are directly connected to each other. Thing is, though, they don't always stay there. Lands have a tendency to shift. Do you know what like water in a bucket,
Mhm.
right? When you pour water in, the water tends to shift around all the water molecules and they could end up anywhere in
Right.
that bucket. It's kind of like that. As more and more stuff falls from the infinite planes above, the water gets shifted and the lands get shifted along with them. So that means that literally the big mountain that is right next to your country or land one day might become a big ocean the next, and then the next one right after that it could be a gigantic desert. As you could imagine, that brings about a lot of different kind of complications, like such things as trade. How can you reliably establish trade if literally the country you're trading with could disappear
Right.
tomorrow? As well as new dangers, such as you don't know what the land that has just kind of, well, for lack of a better term, spawned in might bring. Could bring invaders, could bring in monsters, could bring in friendly folk, friendly civilizations. You don't know until you explore.
Hmm. So what would traveling be like from going from one established place to another in this world?
Hazardous. Because, for one, you don't actually know where all of civilizations may be. And there's a chance that your homeland might not even be there when you get back. That makes adventuring an incredibly perilous but rewarding kind of journey. One where you are able to travel forth and find these incredible places, but you'll never actually know if you'll be able to get home again.
That is crazy.
It's so cool. Um, before, well, I want to talk about something that is my favorite part in your world, just as we're talking about the aspects. And I told you before the podcast I was going to take any opportunity to mention this. Can we talk about the woven? And can you just starting out as one of the first, I know it wasn't the first people you created, but the first just like getting a feel for what one of these um planes of existence in this area may be.
Sure, I'd be more than happy to. So within Refuge, there's actually, and this is important kind of background. There's actually three centralized states of being, if you will. The first two, and these are the main two, are all existence and all nothing. All existence, as you can imagine, is literally all of reality. All nothing is literally the opposite of that. It's not even void. It is literally completely and absolute nothing. All existence spawns from all nothing. But there is a third one, and that is called the conceptual ideal. See, ideas cannot die. They cannot just simply disappear. They just simply become unutilized. That is what the conceptual ideals are. And as you can kind of imagine, the closer something is to, the realm of literal ideas, perhaps the more wackier they might become. The world, or rather the region that the woven come from, is one that is closer to that conceptual ideal boundary. And as a result, their world is perhaps a little bit more different than others. In other words, it's literally an arts and crafts region.
I love it.
Everything within it
So
is
cool.
established from various different kinds of arts and crafts. You could have everything from paper mache trees to styrofoam clouds. It's that kind of a crazy realm. And the woven are a natural species that evolved within that region. They themselves are what I call an artificial natural creature. They are organic in the way that, I don't know, um, that like one of those silly worms on a string might be organic. There's life to them, but they're not doll-like.
Yeah. So, that's just one of the many things you've come up with in this in Refuge, in this trash can of worlds, basically. I know that sounds very bad,
I regret
but
saying it now. I regret. I
That
didn't
is
mean it. I
yeah.
didn't mean it. It was just what popped in my head.
no,
But
and yeah, there is definitely a lot, and I'm more than happy to explore any of it with you.
yeah. So what do you remember what the first one, like first part of Refuge you created was? Or do you remember like your favorite, or like what's the one that stands out to you the most?
Ooh. Well, I'll actually answer your first question, which was what was the
Okay.
first part that I created? The
Hmm.
first part I created was actually Home, the City of Circles, which is now called Haven, the City of Circles. The City of Circles was essentially a fortress city, if you will. I also know that that's been kind of done time and time again. But it was actually created as a result of a picture of a paladin fighting a necromancer. The necromancer turning into a skeletal wyvern and the paladin turning into a holy dragon while within a dragon graveyard. And I got to thinking about that. What kind of a world, what kind of a concept would have allowed this kind of situation to exist? And from that is where Refuge kind of blossomed forth. The idea that these very, very different beings and worlds and whatnot could mix together to create very interesting stories. Ninjas versus wizards, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
I can dig
So
that.
cool.
How do you fireball what you cannot
That
see?
means, well, exactly. And as a result, you can probably imagine that it has created something very complex. You're dealing with sci-fi, you're dealing with political intrigue, you're dealing with savagery, savage civilizations, you're dealing with an evolution of various different lands that all have established rules, all having to meet with each other for perhaps the first time, and you get to see their interactions. For example, and I'll actually bring up the Harith for this one. They're from a land called
Yeah.
Hirasu, which is a gigantic dried out delta. Their region's essentially a gigantic dried out delta,
Hmm.
and they have within this region a precious metal that is essentially acts as a bit of a I don't know, like kind of like copper wire. It allows things to flow through it very well, whether it's magic or sci-fi, doesn't matter. As you can probably imagine, a lot of people want it, and their region as a result gets invaded fairly frequently. Well, all invaders have been beaten back except for one. Now, the reason why all the others were beaten back is because of the natural elements of the desert combined with the ambush style tactics of the Harith. And it becomes easy to see how they could just kind of wear most invading armies down. So, what's an army that could invade a desert like region filled with, relatively decent warriors who are able to ambush and resist invasion? And, well, the answer kind of came as a diesel punk undead.
Yes.
Mad
Undead
Max.
could thrive with. Exactly. So essentially, undead could weather the effects of the desert, and with some technology enhanced within them, they could be able to see through things like sandstorms, which the Harith might utilize to their advantage, in most situations. Little things like that. And it became very easy to see how that particular foe could work against this particular concept. And that's actually something very important in a lot of my work, which is everything has to have a weakness. It's no fun if you're just simply making, Mary Stews or Mary Sues here. Yeah, you got to have weakness, because if you don't have weakness, then you don't have vulnerability. If you don't have vulnerability, then you don't have a story.
You don't have
That
it's
is.
just not interesting anymore. I think where this concept arrived from is the whole Superman god complex. Like Superman just became boring after a time because he just was invulnerable to everything. So what do? They gave him a weakness to a green rock.
Exactly. Which is why any experienced like Superman writer knows that you don't concentrate on his powers, you concentrate on his humanity. But obviously, that's all kind of a little bit
Yeah.
besides the point.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to writing, because typically on this podcast we talk about world building for TTRPGs, but you've explained to me that you're not just creating this for TTRPGs. So, um, first of all, what are you creating this for other than your own enjoyment? And how does that impact your writing, and which we will get to in a second. But jumping from the Superman writing, you see how I'm making this flow?
Very good, very nice. So, we all probably remember roughly as kids, for some of our older folks, that parents would oftentimes have like the stack of encyclopedias, right?
Yeah.
Filled with all sorts of information from all over the world. Well, that has been kind of now more or less been replaced with the internet. But point being, what I'm creating here is not a element for a TTRPG. It's not an element of world building for a book, in the traditional sense, or a TV show or a series or anything like that. This is literally something that I am building to create essentially a creative encyclopedia, an inspirational encyclopedia, to allow other people to take the building blocks that I'm setting down to create their own stuff with, their own stories, their own characters, their own TTRPGs, movies, books, games, whatever it is that they want. Like I said, Refuge is a world for stories. And that is what I want to inspire people to create. So even though I'm not necessarily creating a story of my own, I'm still laying out enough of the building blocks to allow others to do so.
Yeah, yeah. I just knowing a little bit about your world, I would say that you've actually created the foundations for a story, because and you've created many stories within this huge story. Because if I remember correctly, there is a kind of like a scientific like organization. It's it's a species that had
Oh
their home
yes, the
destroyed,
Turians.
the
Yeah.
Turians, that now that they're researching all these other like planes, and so you can find their work in almost not in almost every place, but you can find their work scattered around Refuge. And when you were telling me about that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a story within a setting, like almost like not a setting within a story, but you're creating a setting for stories, but in doing that, you've created stories for people to build upon.
Of course. I mean, you can kind of look at it a little bit like this. It's kind of like the average hero story, right? Hero goes out, he fails, but he rises again, overcomes the great evil, and conquers the day. That's a pretty classic set of building blocks, and that's kind of what I'm doing here. Granted, like you said, it's a little bit more complex than just a simple, I don't know, list of objectives you got to complete, but it's still building blocks at the end of the day, because who knows what people are going to do. What if they want to take these Churians and they want them to try to reestablish their home world? What do they want to take them and their humanitarian approach and allow them to try to have some political intrigue amongst each other as old rivalries begin to bubble back up, born from their home world, and so on and so forth. I could definitely finish the story, but that's not my goal. My goal is to just establish and allow other people to finish it, however it is that they wish to do so.
Hmm. I'm still processing.
Oh, okay. I thought
Yeah.
you were going to say
No.
something.
I'm like,
You looked like you were
it's
about to say something.
the
I was like, go ahead.
open-endedness of it all, and the the endless possibilities where you could just be walking from one city to another and encounter literally anything from all these different races you've spoken of. I mean, it's I'm trying to imagine myself, or like what a cartographer would be doing, like within certain cities. This may be more of a technical question. So, say there is an adventuring party, and you originally described it as like the world is in a bucket and then it's just swished around. So,
Yep.
So we could start at any city, whether it be something that the DM or original storyteller, anything like that can just like come up with. So with different things like that, are there are any of these races so far like a bad, evil? Like what is the like get what I'm trying to, more like a divine? Are there any are there
divine.
any like outside forces that like are literally like looking at this like body of water or universe just like ever swirling? Is there anything like in control of it all? That
Actually, in a way, there is and there isn't. Remember those two concepts I talked about earlier, all existence versus all
Mhm.
nothing? Well, all existence, which is all of reality, what is its goal? If such a thing could have a goal, and that would probably be to continue
Exist.
existing. All nothing would wish to reconsume it all if it too also had a goal. That's just the natural, ebb and flow of those two differing forces. That's just
Mm.
how they work. Now, when we take those two concepts and we add the conceptual ideals into them, we begin to kind of come up with how would these things kind of mix and match and flow into each other. And one of those creations would be the divines, the gods and goddesses, as you more or
Mhm.
less know them. But their relationship with mortals is a little bit more complex. So, to give a little bit of a basis, the gods are a mixture between the conceptual ideals and all existence. By that measure, they are kind of bound by the ideas that they are drawn from. So, like, for example, a god of war can't just stop being a god of war. Even though he can think and he can plan and he can plot and he can scheme and he can do all those things, he can't just not be a god of war. That's the idea he's drawn from. Mortals, on the other hand, do not quite have that limitation. However, they lack oftentimes the power to further their own goals or their own concepts and ideas they wish to further. In which case, then they might plead to a god or a goddess in order to gain that power and do so, which allows the god and goddess then in turn to begin to affect all existence. So there is a natural symbiotic relationship between the two. You mentioned something very interesting, though. Is there evil? And in a way, there is. So I want you to kind of imagine, if you will, a drop of paint, right? You take a small tweezer and you take a small drop of paint from that droplet and you put it into a much greater palette of colors. And then you allow it to mix around for a second and you take that same drop out and you put it back. What do you think occurs? What happens?
Different pigmentations from the mixture get contaminated into the original.
That is correct. Very good. So that is kind of how all existence allows itself to keep existing. In order for all existence to keep existing, it has to experience change. It has to experience novelty, um, as well as anything that prevents stagnation, because stagnation equals the reconsumption of all nothing with all existence. In order to do that, the gods and goddesses, as well as the mortals, in their symbiotic relationship, kind of work together in their ebb and flow to create that novelty, with the mortals experiencing what all existence is and bringing that back up to the gods, who then themselves allow for all existence to essentially get a taste of itself, if you will. However, there is one force that wishes for this all to go away. Currently, and this is a work in progress name, his name is Aramax. Now, there is evil. That's just the same as there is good, but both of them are kind of balanced out. They help to create new situations and the novelty that allows all existence to continue existing, which is the ultimate goal, right? So evil is not quite evil and good isn't quite good. They're just different flavors of various shades of gray. But Aramax wishes for all nothing to reconsume all existence, which he views as an abomination. He is the one god, if you could even call him that, that essentially wishes for the ultimate erasure of everything, which is why he is considered to be pretty much the ultimate antagonist of this entire setting, if you will.
That's what I was kind of getting at. If there was a adventure party going after to destroy something, or like what was trying to inhibit them from adventuring or succeeding, so it would more or less be this entity ultimately, more like the big bad boogeyman.
Yeah. The thing is, though, is he might be on the side of that adventuring party. Imagine, if you will, an entire plane, or like various different the all reality, the various different planes of existence. Imagine if good won. What does that create? It creates stagnation. That's right. Which allows for the furtherance of all nothing to reconsume all existence. So Aramax is just as likely to be with his adventuring party, just the same as he is to be against that adventuring party, whichever one allows for that stagnation to occur.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. So he's almost like, if this is a good description of this, he's almost like the boogeyman in a way that the party doesn't know, because I'm assuming the regular people of this world don't know about this existence of this entity, right? Or am I wrong?
I mean, he might be known, but it's kind of like known in the whispers of the wind kind of a thing.
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
known and not known.
Yeah. So he's almost like the villain that arrives in the last act, like it's this build up of, oh, there's something in the background that we don't know about, and then in the last act, I just imagine where the party has been striving to do good, and like in the last arc of like the campaign, if we're going with a TTRPG, or the last act of a book or a movie, suddenly they realize that their good has caused this stagnation, basically, and that it's allowed this like consumption and like nothingness to take over, and that's when this entity swoops in and like does his thing. And he's like, you have played right into my plans.
I keep imagining it like the nothing, literally the nothing from the Never-Ending Story, eating away at the edges of the world until so it's just like
honestly, that's not a bad analogy.
Yeah, it's another thing that kind of comes up too. So this entity will also be born of ideas as well, would they not?
That is right. That is right.
Has Neil Gaiman had a impact on your storytelling?
Amusingly enough, no. And I've actually had a couple of people tell me that. Not because I'm sure he's not a great writer or anything like that. Just again, a lot of my work is actually drawn not from other ideas or stories, because I frankly just don't have the time to dive into all that stuff. So as much as I would like to dive into his work, I just
he doesn't dive into it. American Gods doesn't explain it as well as you have, actually. So it's just like, these gods are just born of belief, which is overdone in and of itself, but you've gone into a much deeper, like, you've actually explained it better than nothing against Neil Gaiman. Great writer, love his work. Just, that was I like drawing or like making connections and things in my head. So the Never-Ending Story and the American Gods get coming up in my head with this. So it's like this combination of just two different worlds, but that is what Refuge is it not? It's just all these different things coming in together.
That's right. And there's some very big questions that require answers to. Like, for example, one of the questions that I needed to have answered that created that whole spiel of mine was, why does evil exist? What is the purpose of it? Why is it there? What is it doing? Like, why do people choose to go along with it? Why does it thrive in some places? And part of that answer was so literally existence could keep existing.
Yeah, I mean, it's breaking my brain. Just listening to you, it's breaking and like my brain is folding in on itself. But we were talking about like how sometimes like real life experiences affect you, but you don't have time to dive into all these fantasy worlds and all these fictional worlds. But how do you think your experiences in real life affect your world building? So
Well,
whether
that's a very good
yeah,
answer or a very good
yeah,
question.
question.
And what I will say is I've actually very extensively have done my research, if you will.
Yeah.
When I went to college, I did everything I could to experience all different facets of like, human society, theology, sociology, um, what do you call it? Psychology, as well as a lot of the other things. For me, I'm actually a psychology major who obviously became a counseling major at some point, but I made sure to take the time to look through things like criminal law and stuff like that, specifically so I could understand how all of these different factors kind of work and ping off of each other, essentially, all these different viewpoints. And that stuff is stuff that I bring into my world building. And I did that very purposely to do so because, like I said, I've been world building for a long time, and I needed material from somewhere, so I figured I might as well take it from college.
Yeah, that's good. And why exactly did you start world building? Like, was it like something that triggered? Not that sounds bad. Was it something that started you on world building, or was it like you just wanted to, or yeah, why did you start world
The
building?
catalyst.
The
Right.
catalyst, basically. Yeah.
Well, as I kind of mentioned earlier, that one picture kind of started getting my brain rolling, and I felt like eventually at some point I had lightning in a bottle, and I figured I'd run along with it. But the other part of it, and probably the more true answer, is I have ADHD. And
Yes.
something like world building allows me to be able to focus on all different facets depending on the interest level of my ADHD, and allows it to kind of thrive in an environment where it's like, well, I don't have to just do one thing. I can literally do all the things and I'm still making progress.
That's yeah, I really like that because as someone who also has ADHD, when I world build, I jump around like a maniac. It's five different tabs open with like different things going on, and I'm like, oh, well, this and this and this. I'm like, well, I need to work on this, but I'm actually working on this instead. So, yeah, I love that you're taking this 80 this I don't mean to say it like this ADHD your ADHD and putting it to almost giving it food in a way.
Harnessing it.
Like yeah, harnessing it, using it and like stimulating it and using it to your advantage. It's so cool.
I mean, we all have to play the cards that we're dealt,
Mhm.
right?
Exactly.
Definitely.
But it's very interesting how you were able to identify that about yourself and like use it for the betterment of imagination and stuff. I'm not
I
very
appreciate that.
wordy right now, apparently. Apparently, I'm not very not doing well in my words right
Words are
now.
hard.
Well,
But
how about this?
yeah, words are
You
hard.
you actually mentioned a little bit earlier that you wanted to talk about the woven. Was there anything in specific that you'd like to
Oh my
talk
gosh.
about with them?
Tell me about the boxes, the heart
Boxes.
boxes.
The
Tell
the
Chan
oh, the
specifically
puzzle boxes,
the
Uh,
yes.
puzzle boxes. Tell Chandler about
puzzle
the puzzle
boxes.
boxes, please. Oh, they're
What?
so cool. Just tell him about the puzzle boxes.
So one of the challenges that I had is how do we make an artificial species able to reproduce in a way that is engaging, creative, and not necessarily fun, but more unique, more original than just simply creating a robot. So what the woven will actually do is they'll engage on these very, very long relationships with each other in order to establish connection. And during the climax of that connection, they will, begin to take bits and pieces of themselves to start creating new woven, right? Because they are essentially these, not necessarily patchwork dolls, but they are artificial in nature. And then, as the creme de la creme, if you will, they will reach inside themselves and they will actually take out a piece of their puzzle box, which then, through this connection that they have formed with this other woven, or several woven, if that's what happens, will combine the pieces together to give to the child, essentially ensuring that the child is not only a piece of the mother and father, literally, physically, and spiritually, in a way, if that's how you want to view the puzzle box, but also formed from their very relationship, their ideas and their perceptions of the world. Because, like, for example, the woven will stitch on symbology onto the child depending on what kind of experiences the parents have had. One of the examples I gave was like a shield that they might put onto the child's, like, say, their back, as a representation of a time that when the parent was saved by a knight. But yeah, the
It's so
puzzle
cool.
boxes are literally the thing that helps to give the child life, formed from the connection relationship with the
So
parents.
this is so the woven are literally. I may have missed this earlier, but they are the entities, the natural born um, species, if you will, of refuge. Then correct. So
No,
they're
their
from
their their region's the same as
they're
again. Yeah, their region was taken from the infinite multiverse.
That's crazy because because it seems like in a universe or in a world of Reforge or Refuge where ideas and concepts and meaning literally can create gods, that these
Hmm.
are actually seem to be the most closely tied to it, if you will. Like, did you mean for that, or like, even though they are technically from somewhere else, are they are they the ones that seem to be the most
Well,
like woven into Refuge?
good play.
Ba-doom-tsh.
So essentially, refuge itself is actually a small part of a much greater whole, but that whole is unknown. We don't actually know what the rest of the multiverse is, except from the little glimpse and flashes we get that falls through the cracks and into refuge. So the woven and their region, concurrently, were taken from all existence elsewhere and brought down to refuge for one reason or another. So they're not born from refuge; they're born from somewhere else, and they became integrated into
Woven.
refuge. Hmm. You got
Okay,
it.
so now it makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. But with the Turians, I specifically remember, and you can talk about this if you want, but you talked about their planet, and I can't remember if it's their planet that fell into refuge that caused their whole humanitarian um like society and wanting to help other people, or they went into refuge with that purpose. I don't remember. You're gonna have to remind me, because that's just another concept you have
Hmm.
of a species that ended up in refuge. But I do not remember specifically the Churian thing, so you're gonna have to remind me.
Honestly, you remembered pretty well. The
Sweet.
Turians, however, have gone through quite a bit of development since. Their
Okay,
planet
okay.
did not fall into refuge. Their planet
Got
was
it.
actually destroyed aside. And the Turians ended up going to refuge. They didn't necessarily know they were going to refuge, but they went through essentially what is a one-way portal called oh goodness, what did I call it?
One-way portal.
We'll,
One
we'll we'll
way.
just call it one-way portal, but it's
Okay,
the
perfect.
Homestead Gate.
Oh,
That's
okay.
it, the Homestead
Okay,
Gate.
okay, cool. That's way cooler than one-way portal.
And they ended up in refuge. But to kind of give their very brief synopsis on them, they're the ones who destroyed their world. It wasn't some god, it wasn't some greater entity, it wasn't even natural disasters. It was through their own deliberate actions. And it was through their deliberate actions that they became humanitarians as a result. What I
Yeah,
found to be very interesting is oftentimes we come up with these very militaristic, very warlike kind of like challengers and powerful forces within a lot of different worlds and world building, but very rarely do I see humanitarian approaches, and that's what I wanted to concentrate on with the Turians. How could they have realistically have evolved into these humanitarians, and then cast into the complex world that is Refuge? How could they thrive? And that was the questions that I wanted to answer with them.
yeah.
That's
Because I remember.
no, no,
Oh,
no, no,
sorry,
no, no, no.
Chandler, you
I
can
was just
go.
going to say, again, I keep drawing from things that I recently read. I just got finished with Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive, so that last book that was just massive and thick. It finally answered a lot of things that have been going on. So basically, there was a group of people who actually came from a destroyed world and came to another world. Um, so these are more or less I could just imagine like somewhere down the line they're humanitarian, but like it's also it seems like it's ingrained into their religion more or less. That like even if some of them are like passed on, like they don't remember what happened to said world long ago. They don't remember the names or the cities or the lands or anything like that. They're just like this is ingrained in them to this is what we must do, like because the alternative is we've seen it in our blood somewhere down the line.
Right. What I call them are the great shames.
Ah,
And the Turians are divided actually into various different, not necessarily subspecies, but subcultures. And each of these cultures carries with them a great shame, something that their ancestors did that essentially caused the destruction of their home world, or further the final war that eventually caused that destruction. So, like for example, one of the cultures was a culture of mercenaries who literally sold themselves for gold and glory during the final war. And through their participation, they essentially not only committed great bloodshed, but they also continued fights and battles that probably could have ended much earlier with much less bloodshed as a result. And that is one of the great chains that they carry with them. As a result, they actually wear like armor made out of gold, not because it's protected, but because it's purely the opposite. They want to remind themselves through their attire that they at one point had sold themselves out for gold, and as a result, they performed very, very how best to say it,
Heinous.
yeah, heinous actions during the final war, which literally it was like brother against brother. They were literally killing their own families just for a little bit of money.
sin of greed.
That's right. And each of the subcultures obviously have their own individual shames. That's just one
I
example.
love it. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, that's so cool. And another, just hitting at like the points that at least I know, that I can recall, of Refuge, the Harith,
Hmm.
was one of your most developed species, which we mentioned earlier. Um, you didn't, when we were talking about them, you didn't mention how you didn't describe them at all. But I was imagining them in my head, but then I just realized now people don't know what they look like look like. So could you describe them for us, or and we can put a picture up on the YouTube thing. But
Sure.
you,
Yeah, I'd be happy
when
to.
you were telling me that you created a species that you thought would thrive most in the environment you created. So what are the Harith? I'm saying that correctly? The Harith?
Yep,
Harith?
you're
Because
saying it
I
absolutely
always,
correctly.
yeah, because I always mispronounced it when we first started talking about this.
I remember that.
Yep.
So for the Harith, they were actually one of my first big projects when it came to refuge, and the question I wanted to answer with them was, what kind of a species could realistically have evolved within this setting? Usually, we see it the other way around, right? We see the creature, and then we see the kind of like world build being built around them. I wanted to do it in reverse. So giant dried out delta, massive canyons spanning all throughout it, lots of heat. what kind of creature could have evolved from that? And obviously, I did draw some inspiration from actual nature, but what I eventually came up with, which was this bipedal creature with digitigrade legs that essentially had many specific features on it that allowed it to survive in this environment. For example, they have these long, thick tails that act as water and fat storage within their bodies to allow them to like subsist for long periods of time, or rather longer periods of time within the desert if they're not able to find sustenance. They have two sets of ears, one that allows them to hear high frequency and one that allows them to hear low frequency sounds, specifically so they can hear the echoes bouncing off the canyon walls and better pinpoint not only what is making those sounds, but where it's coming from in the myriad of confusing canyons around them. Their ears tend to be relatively large, allowing for heat dispersion. They have relatively short fur with a kind of a dusty coat on it that allows them to better weather against the heat of the sun. They actually have these scales on the tip of their muzzle that is actually a carryover from when their ancestors were more feral, digging in the sand, and that those scales on their ancestors' muzzles allowed them to be able to dig into the sand with their muzzle and prevent damage to that part of their body. And when they evolved into bipedals, it just kind of carried over because it just wasn't hurting anything. Just kind of like how humans kind of keep. Oh goodness, what's a good one? Like for example,
This.
there's actually a corner of your eye that has that is a part of like the evolutionary a carryover from some of our ancestors. There's a portion of your eye that actually is like that. It's kind of like that for the Hurith as well
Ooh,
with their
interesting.
This
scales.
this
That's
is
so
right up
cool.
your alley, is it not, Plutarch?
I know
This
this.
is
This is why I
right
fell
up
in
your
love
alley.
with Refuge. Is because I came into, I think it was a stream that you were doing, Rygone, and
Mhm.
I saw this, and I was like, oh my gosh. So the Harith, I think, were the first thing I was introduced to, because I believe you that was what you were working on when I came into like your community. But
Mhm.
so that's why I fell in love with Refuge, is because it was very like biological, and like you took inspiration from nature. But you take it, but the more I learned about it, the more I realized it's not you're just taking inspiration from nature, you're taking inspiration from everything.
Mhm.
So how society works, like you said earlier, in college you tried to like expose yourself to as much as possible in order to create the most realistic, I don't know, most realistic, or just most, I think, interesting is the better word for it, most interesting kind of world that you could create. And
That's
I
right.
think that's just amazing that you're able to take all these aspects of our real world and plug them in with your imagination.
I really appreciate that. And I will actually give you another word, and that word is inspirational. Because that
Ooh,
is actually
yeah.
the prime goal for why I'm doing all of this is to inspire others to create. I'm actually hoping that this will be a legacy of mine, something that I can leave behind that will allow other people to thrive and experience and create in ways that I can only imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I want to ask you another question about how you come up with concepts, since we're talking about like concepts and inspirations. Where do you start with an idea or a concept for a part of Refuge, and how do you expand upon that idea? Um, yeah.
There's actually a few different ways that I do that. It kind of depends on what part I'm kind of looking at as well as the flavor of the day. For example, one of my favorite challenges is I'll just take random words and I will try to develop something with random words. So I could get something like window rose salsa, and I'll be like, okay, what could I take from that random combination of words and develop something that is coherent, has reasonable reason for existence, and is inspirational and creative at the same time. So, like right off the top of my head, I could probably imagine say a church, for example. So we'll take the window aspect with the stained glass. We'll take a church that celebrates life with roses, and they celebrate community with good food, which is the pinnacle of which is salsa. So something like that. Obviously, that's a very basic example, but you kind of
Yeah.
get the idea. The
Yeah.
other side of it is I will take a question or I'll take a concept that I feel has not been developed very, very well, and I will challenge myself to try to come up with something with that concept. So, like for example, with the Turians, I wanted to create something that was humanitarian, like a big organization that could reasonably thrive within refuge that wasn't military in nature but humanitarian in nature. For the Woven, I wanted to create something that was able to that was cultureless but was able to thrive despite being cultureless,
Mm-hmm.
which is a whole nother thing that we actually have not gotten into in this particular podcast.
Yeah. But go check it out on World Anvil if you want to see it. Go.
I'm definitely going to be checking this out. So
Yeah.
I
Anyone
highly
who's
encourage
listening,
it.
go check it out.
I'm constantly updating it, and you
Yeah.
guys essentially for World Anvil, like I said, it's a consolidation of all the information, knowledge, and concepts that I brought together. So it's an active work in progress that will all eventually, hopefully, be developed into a book that you guys can actually feel and read and experience for
love that.
yourself.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Everyone who's listening, go check it out. It's super cool. And we barely scratched the surface on what Refuge is. You have so much in your head that is, well, on World Anvil and in your head that's crazy that I
Hmm.
love hearing about. So that's a super cool technique that you use to develop concepts and stuff. Now, since we have discussed in the past world building with TTRPGs on this podcast, I wanted to ask, do you have like a favorite TTRPG that you would want Refuge to exist in, or like that you think Refuge would work the best in? Because we have like D&D, obviously, but then we have new ones like Daggerheart, or Pathfinder, or all these other TTRPGs, and there's so many I cannot name off the top of my head. But do you have one that you would personally like to see? I know you said that people can create their own stories and stuff, but do you have one that you would personally like to play in or like to see that Refuge take place with?
I've actually have an example of a Pathfinder game that I ran a good long time ago that involved Refuge.
Ooh.
It actually was taken from the region of Val and Or, which is, I won't go into detail here, but essentially I ran the players through a plague fortress, or rather a fortress that had contracted a plague during the course of their adventures, and they got to see some of the sci-fi aspects as well as how the uniqueness of refuge could affect even something as simple as a medieval society. For example, one of the puzzles I used involved paintings that had numbers hidden within them. Thing is, though, these paintings weren't just always simple, slices of life of medieval life or nobility or whatever. One of the paintings literally was a planetscape of a solar system that they just that obviously that nobody could have possibly have known existed within that region itself. But anyway, if I had to take a guess, if there's like say, obviously D&D and Pathfinder are really good. I'm not as familiar with like say Daggerheart, but if there's like say a TTRPG for I don't know, Magic the Gathering or something akin to that, it probably would slot in pretty well with something like that.
Yeah, because I'm not super familiar with Magic the Gathering, but Magic the Gathering is like different planes of existence and stuff.
Yep,
Am I
yep,
right?
yep.
That's right.
Okay, perfect. I am a nerd. Yay. But yeah, that's super super cool. Tell me more about this Pathfinder game that you ran. Um how did you insert your world into a TTRPG? Like how we're talking about almost.
Sure. I guess I can give a little bit more detail on Val and Or then just to kind of give a little bit of context. So
Okay.
Val and Or are two regions within Refuge that for some reason or another have kind of become combined together. Val is the center. It is a place with many, many hundreds of different houses of nobility, all kind of scrounging and fighting each other for little bits and pieces of land, if you will. And there's obviously a lot of political intrigue. Well, as you can probably imagine, if you have some kids, well, only one of them can realistically take your small parcel of land. So what do you do with the rest of them? Well, one of the solutions they came up with was sending them to Or, specifically to the border of Val and Or. On the border in Val and Or are a line of fortresses that these minor nobility will essentially slot themselves into to try and resist whatever outside forces Or will try to impress upon Val. Now, Or is a wasteland. It is a monstrous mountainous area that is just filled with things like roving war bands, monsters beyond description, so on and so forth. But it also acts as a little bit of a protection for Val. It not only is it a threat, but it also acts as a buffer against the rest of Refuge, if you will. But all that besides, these nobility will insert themselves into these fortresses, and as you can probably guess, most of them don't do too well. You've got these very inexperienced leaders trying to resist something that, quite frankly, would require a lot of experience, and they tend to fail more often than not, leaving these fortresses empty to be refilled once more by the next line of nobility. And hey, if they succeed, then they get to go back home with full of gold and glory, and they get to overthrow the firstborn and say, "Hey, I'm better asser than you."
Yeah. So, yeah, how did you incorporate that particular part of Refuge into, like, what mechanics did you use to show this part of Refuge, or did you use any mechanics at all to create this story?
Well, the particular mechanics I used was actually not so much mechanics, but rather setting.
Okay.
So obviously we utilized the fortress concept for the
Mm-hmm.
players. This is one of those abandoned fortresses that the nobility had failed to keep, but there must be treasure. There must be something in there that they had left behind. So they go exploring, and they find within it. Well, it turns out that the people within had actually, because they had because they had insulted a cleric of a god of disease and what was the other part? Disease and manners, essentially. Like what's that word for when people like you welcome them into your home?
Yeah.
Hospitality?
Hospitality. He was a god of disease and hospitality, and well, they insulted
That's
this guy,
funny.
and he cursed the whole fortress with this disease of undeath, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
where the people within couldn't quite die, and that was a little taste of just what refuge could offer, because that's not a natural part of Valinor. Other concepts that we found within it was things like a little bit more of advanced technologies that you just wouldn't see. We saw the paintings that showed places that just didn't exist in Valinor. They showed other locations within a refuge. They got to meet species that were not a part of Valinor in the town that was at the base of the fortress. So they got to meet these new and unique species that they otherwise never would have been privy to. Little things like that that help to show that this wasn't just a typical medieval fantasy adventure.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I feel like I was gonna. Oh, yes.
Hmm? Oh no! Oh
You
no! 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 No!
pointed.
No! I was Valinor. My Lord of the Rings head got mixed up and it's like, oh, Valinor.
Yeah.
My
Well, when you combine both
Yeah,
words
so I was
together.
like, yeah. Well,
Valor.
I was getting my mind was going straight to Valinor, and now I was like, nope, I'm there
Yep.
now. ADHD.
Yep. Yep. If
Um,
you actually combine both words together, but you take out the and, what do you
Valor.
get?
you get Valor.
You got it.
I
Yep.
got distracted.
I wanted. I just talking about the magic and stuff. I if tell me if this is wrong, but I recall something you mentioned about magic where it's like the spells cast are from this conceptual place that we've talked about. and that these different schools of magic are actually conceptual and then real and like something else. I recall something about that in this world you've created, but I might be wrong.
It's actually, in a way, you are kind of correct, and at the
Okay.
same time, there's a little bit more to it.
Okay.
So for
Okay.
that, that's what I call the three aspects of power, because the big question there is, how do clerics have power? How does their power differentiate from a mage? How does a mage's power differentiate from, like, say, a monk? And I thought over that for quite a while, and what I eventually came up with was the three aspects of power. The first one being the manipulation of reality, so like a mage or a soldier with a gun. They're utilizing all existence itself in order to fuel their whatever skills or spells or whatever they have to use. They're using stuff that already exists, more or less. For things like, say, clerics, they would utilize divinity's conceptual ideals. So they would utilize the conceptual ideal, more or less, if you believe it, it'll happen, kind of power in order to fuel their abilities. And finally, for, say, something like a monk or a brawler or something like that, something that has a lot more personable to them, or not personable, but a lot more intimate to them,
Yeah,
we would
physical.
have the casting of one's fostered soul. So this is actually a part that we hadn't touched on, but souls are a very important part of refuge, or within the concept of refuge, because those souls are the things that allows all existence to, well, keep existing. They're the things that get flavored. Those are the things that allow for all existence to get a taste of itself, more or less. But as you can imagine, depending on how you experience all existence and depending on the choices you make and whatnot, your soul is going to look very different from other souls. A monk soul, for example, they're going to be a good fighter purely because they work their physical body and their soul accordingly to engage in such conflicts. And those were
Okay.
the three separations that I had to answer those three questions. How do you differentiate between those three aspects of power?
Yeah. And just talking about TTRPGs and magic just reminded me of that. And I thought that was important because I think it's cool.
It is very
Okay.
important.
um One last question, which is probably the hardest question,
Okay.
before we wrap up. What is your favorite part of Refuge?
The details.
Mm.
The details. Ooh, you answered
Yeah.
that way faster than I thought you were good. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Ooh, that's
So
such a good answer.
the reason why I say that is because I could just take one aspect and I could just say this is my favorite, like the Harith or something like that. But honestly, it's not just the Harith that are fascinating, it's the things that make up the Harith. It is the things that make up the individual crops. It is the things that make up the individual regions. The details are the things that I like the most because those are the characteristics of these, well, fantastical lands and species and whatnot. So that's my favorite
Yeah.
part.
Yeah. Definitely.
I love it.
Definitely.
All
I
right.
I always go back to this analogy sometimes, like going back to authors and things like that. Like Brandon Sanderson being a brilliant author, probably considered the greatest living fantasy writer of our time at the moment. His worlds you can you can basically say are like beautiful city with skyscrapers lining the skyline, just beautiful buildings. But in all of that, in all the world of fantasy, Brandon Sanderson, yes, has built all of this. But in the middle is this old building that is handcrafted down to the detail of the lining of the windowsills, hand carved, and that is Tolkien.
We can't go an
Something
episode
that
without mentioning
Well,
Tolkien.
I did Valinor. That was stuck in my head.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
fair enough. Something that I would actually use as a little bit of an analogy actually comes from Redwall.
Oh,
What is the thing that everybody remembers most from Redwall? Do they remember the characters? Do they remember the adventures? Not quite. At least not for most people I've spoken to. What they remember most is the food, because that food was explained in such exquisite detail that people, they got hungry. They fantasized over these fantastical meals. And that's why I think detail is important, because that's
Yeah.
what sticks with
exactly.
people.
All right. That's such an amazing thing to end with, but Plug yourself again, Rygone. Where can people find you? And where can they find Refuge?
You can find Refuge on World Anvil. I believe it's somewhere in that big old list, but if you type in the search bar Refuge, I'm sure you'll be able to find me just fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can also find me on, frequently streaming on Twitch at Rygone Plays, doing world building, like active world building there, as well as a variety of other things if that's what you enjoy.
Yes.
And yeah, I highly recommend that if you enjoy what you see, consider giving it a follow because it is an active development and it will be an active development for many months, many years to come.
Okay, awesome. We will also link everything in the description or in the comments so everyone can have easy access to check out your stuff. But this has been Playing with Ink, and thank you all so much for listening. I've been Plutach.
I'm Nayruan.
And thank you so much, Rygone, for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Of course. All right, we will see you next time.